Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, wasn't just any soldier in King David's army. He was one of the most valiant men in Israel. In fact, he came from a family of warriors. His father, Jehoiada, was known for his courage and strength, which undoubtedly influenced Benaiah's own rise to prominence. The Bible introduces Benaiah in 2 Samuel 23 and 1 Chronicles 11 as one of David's mighty men. But Benaiah's story stands out because of his incredible feats of courage, strength, and most importantly, faith. It's easy to see why his story, though brief, is so impactful and continues to inspire readers even today. From a young age, Benaiah's bravery seemed to set him apart. Unlike the warriors who earned their fame by leading great armies or slaying hundreds in battle, Benaiah's heroism is highlighted by more personal, intense, and singular acts of valor. His story begins with one of the most unusual encounters found in the Bible. Benaiah descended into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. This might sound like a simple statement, but when you break down the details, it becomes one of the most extraordinary feats of courage imaginable. Let's think about this for a moment. First, consider the setting: a pit. This means there was no way out. Benaiah intentionally put himself in a confined space with a predator. Most people would avoid a lion at all costs, but Benaiah, he went looking for it. In this pit there was no room to retreat, no place to hide. He had to face the lion head on. Next, consider the weather. It was snowing. The ground would have been slippery and visibility would have been poor. Every move had to be precise, every step carefully calculated. Yet despite these conditions, Benaiah didn't hesitate. He went down into the pit, fully aware of the danger, and killed the lion with his own hands. Can you imagine the scene? The cold biting at his skin, the breath of the lion visible in the frigid air, both Benaiah and the lion trying to maintain their footing in the snow-covered pit. Yet even with the odds stacked against him, Benaiah emerged victorious. This moment in Benaiah's life is often seen as a symbol of facing impossible odds. A lion is a ferocious predator, and in a pit it would be even more dangerous. Yet Benaiah's faith and trust in God were stronger than his fear. He knew that with God on his side, he could face even the fiercest of opponents. The lion, often seen as a symbol of raw power, chaos, and danger, is a perfect metaphor for the challenges we face in life. Whether it's an overwhelming situation, a crippling fear, or a personal struggle, we all encounter lions at some point in our journey. But Benaiah's example shows that no matter how fierce the challenge, we don't face it alone. With God's guidance, we can overcome even the most terrifying obstacles. It's a powerful lesson for us as well. How often do we find ourselves in situations that seem impossible, where there's no way out? The story of Benaiah reminds us that faith can overcome fear, and with God's help, we can defeat the lions in our own lives. It's important to reflect on the fact that Benaiah didn't just avoid the lion. He went toward it. He faced the challenge head on, knowing that he had God's strength behind him. How often in life do we try to avoid the problems that seem too big for us, only to find that they linger? Benaiah's story encourages us to confront our challenges directly, trusting that God will provide the strength we need. But Benaiah's feats of courage didn't stop with the lion. Another story in the Bible tells us that he faced two mighty warriors of Moab and struck them down. Now, Moabite warriors were known for their strength and fierceness in battle. These were not weak, untrained men. The Moabites had a reputation for being fierce and brutal in combat. For Benaiah to take on not just one, but two of them, is another testament to his bravery and skill. This wasn't just a random encounter, it was a showdown between a man of God and the enemies of Israel. The Bible doesn't go into detail about the exact circumstances of this encounter, but we can infer that these were no ordinary soldiers. Moabite warriors were fierce opponents, and defeating two of them single-handedly would have been no easy task. Yet Benaiah prevailed, once again demonstrating that his strength was not just physical, but spiritual as well. Benaiah knew that his strength came from God. He understood that in every battle, it wasn't just his skill or his weapons that gave him the victory. It was his faith in God's plan. It's a reminder that no matter how skilled or prepared we are, true victory comes from relying on God. Think about the confidence Benaiah must have had to take on not one, but two skilled warriors at once. This confidence wasn't arrogance. It was a deep trust in God's protection and guidance. He didn't back down because he knew that he wasn't fighting alone. And that's something we can all learn from. When we face challenges that seem too great, when the odds seem stacked against us, we can move forward with the same confidence, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. The third story about Benaiah is perhaps the most remarkable. He went up against a giant Egyptian warrior. This Egyptian was said to be about 7.5 feet tall, armed with a massive spear like a weaver's rod. This is the kind of spear designed to impale from a distance, a weapon built for strength and intimidation. Benaiah, by contrast, went into the battle armed only with a staff. Imagine the scene for a moment. A massive warrior towering over Benaiah, wielding a spear designed for long-range combat. It must have seemed like a hopeless fight to anyone watching. But Benaiah, undeterred, closed the distance, seized the giant spear, and used it against him to win the battle. Benaiah's bravery wasn't just about physical strength, it was about strategy. He knew that he couldn't defeat the Egyptian in a traditional spear fight. Instead, he got close enough to disarm him, turning the enemy's own weapon against him. How often do we find ourselves in battles where the enemy seems to have the upper hand? Whether it's a personal struggle, a difficult decision, or a spiritual battle, there are times when it feels like we're outmatched. But Benaiah's story reminds us that even when we don't have the tools we think we need, God can turn the situation around. By seizing the giant's own weapon, Benaiah demonstrated that even when the odds are stacked against us, God can provide us with the tools we need to win the fight. These stories of Benaiah's bravery and skill might seem like the stuff of legend, but they are recorded in the Bible as historical fact. Benaiah's reputation as a mighty warrior was so great that King David himself took notice. In fact, Benaiah became one of David's most trusted soldiers, eventually being appointed as the head of David's personal bodyguard. This was no small honor. The head of the king's bodyguard was responsible for protecting the king's life at all costs, a role that required immense trust and loyalty. To be chosen for such a role, Benaiah had to not only be skilled in battle, but also deeply loyal and trusted by David. It's clear that Benaiah wasn't just a warrior. He was a man of integrity, someone who could be trusted with the most important task in the kingdom, protecting the king. This relationship with David speaks volumes about Benaiah's character. As head of David's personal guard, Benaiah was tasked with being closer to the king than almost anyone else. He would have to be ready to lay down his life for David at any moment. And while Benaiah was a warrior who had no problem facing enemies in combat, the role of protecting David was perhaps an even greater responsibility. He wasn't just guarding a man, he was guarding God's anointed king. The weight of this role can't be overstated. For Benaiah, this meant that his service wasn't just to David, it was ultimately to God. Protecting the king was a sacred duty, and Benaiah approached it with the same faith and courage that had defined his life. But Benaiah's story doesn't end with David. After David's death, his son Solomon became king, and Benaiah's loyalty shifted to the new king. Solomon, recognizing Benaiah's courage and skill, promoted him even further, making him the commander of the entire army of Israel. This was a position of immense power and responsibility, and Benaiah fulfilled it with the same faith and dedication that had defined his entire life. In fact, Benaiah played a key role during Solomon's rise to power. When Solomon's reign was threatened by various conspirators, it was Benaiah who was called upon to bring justice. One of these conspirators was Adonijah, Solomon's brother, who attempted to claim the throne. Solomon sent Benaiah to confront Adonijah, and in a decisive act, Benaiah executed him. This was not just a political act, it was a demonstration of Benaiah's loyalty to God's chosen king and his unwavering commitment to protect the kingdom of Israel from internal threats. Throughout his life, Benaiah's actions were guided by his unwavering faith in God. His courage wasn't just a product of his physical strength or military skill, it was rooted in his deep trust in God's plan for his life. He didn't hesitate to face lions, giants, or enemy warriors because he knew that God was with him in every battle. And that's the lesson we can take from Benaiah's story today. When we face challenges that seem insurmountable, when we feel outmatched or overwhelmed, we can look to Benaiah's example of faith and courage. We too can trust that God will give us the strength and tools we need to overcome whatever obstacles stand in our way. Benaiah's story reminds us that bravery isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward despite it. Whether we're facing a metaphorical lion in a pit, an enemy warrior, or a giant obstacle in our lives, we can trust that God will guide our steps and give us the courage to prevail. His story is one of triumph over fear, faith over doubt, and victory through God's strength. In the Bible, Benaiah doesn't have as many verses dedicated to him as some of the other well-known figures, but his legacy is just as powerful. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a man of faith who trusted God with his life. And because of that trust, he was able to do incredible things that seemed impossible to those around him. The story of Benaiah also teaches us that God doesn't always remove the challenges from our lives, but he gives us the strength to face them. Benaiah still had to go down into the pit to face the lion. He still had to confront the Moabite warriors and the Egyptian giant. God didn't take those battles away from him, but he gave him the courage and the ability to win. In the same way, we may not be able to avoid the battles in our own lives, but we can trust that God will give us the strength to fight them. Benaiah's story is a call to action for all of us. It's a reminder that we are all called to face challenges with faith and courage. Whether those challenges are physical, emotional, or spiritual, we can trust that God will be with us every step of the way. Like Benaiah, we can step into the pit, confront the giants, and come out victorious, not because of our own strength, but because of God's strength working through us. So the next time you find yourself in a situation that feels impossible, remember the story of Benaiah. Remember his courage, his faith, and his trust in God. And remember that the same God who gave Benaiah the strength to face lions and giants is the same God who walks with you today. With God by your side, there is no battle too great, no obstacle too large, and no challenge too daunting. Like Benaiah, you can face whatever comes your way with the confidence that God will guide you to victory.